ISIL's new tactics, the armed group's murder of a Jordanian pilot, is seen as the harshest response yet against the US-led coalition. But will that weaken or reinforce the resolve to fight ISIL? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Sika. Jordan has executed 2 prisoners in response to an ISIL video that appears to show a Jordanian pilot being burned alive. The fate of 26-year-old Muath Kasasbi has gripped Jordan for weeks, and it's provoked anger about the country's involvement in the US-led fight against the armed group. ISIL has, of course, become synonymous with this type of violence, but what's seen as the particularly merciless nature of Kasasbi's killing could have repercussions for Jordan's role in the anti-ISIL coalition. And before we bring in our guest, Nasrini Shamaila helps set things up from the Jordanian capital, Amman.
Jordan warned of an earth-shaking response to ISIL's murder of its pilot Muath al-Kasasbi, and that response came swiftly. At dawn on Wednesday, the authorities executed Iraqi prisoner Sajid al-Rishawi, whom ISIL had demanded Jordan release. She had been on death row for 8 years for taking part in a 2005 attack in Amman that killed 60 people. Another Iraqi prisoner was also executed. Ziad al-Karbouli was sentenced to death by hanging for murdering a Jordanian truck driver in Iraq. The government confirmed its pilot was killed on January 3rd, a month before ISIL released the video apparently showing him being burned alive. Al Jazeera will not show those pictures. The Jordanian king cut short his visit to Washington, D.C., but addressed the Jordanian people in a statement before heading back to Amman.
With sadness and sorrow, we received the news about the martyrdom of our hero Muath al-Kasasbi at the hands of the terrorist and cowardly Daesh, that criminal and deviant gang which is not related to our noble faith in any way. Our heroic pilot Muath died while defending his faith, homeland, and nation.
The pilot's father, who was too shaken to comment after finding out his son was killed, came out with these strong statements hours later.
I demand the revenge be greater than executing prisoners. I demand that ISIL be annihilated. This murderous organization made up of militants from all over the world. They are acting in barbaric manners, violating all the international laws, codes of ethics, and prisoners' conventions. That's why I strongly demand the government to swiftly take revenge for the blood of Muath and the dignity of our country.
There were riots in the pilot's home province of Al-Karak. People say they feel ISIL is trying to stir up violence and unrest in the country. Kasasbi's family and tribal members say they're devastated at the news. But for some who were questioning Jordan's role in the international coalition against ISIL, now seem to have answers.
I absolutely support Jordan's role in the coalition against ISIL. Before, I didn't encourage it. Now ISIL has become our problem, and it's imperative for Jordan to stay in the coalition in order to prove that Muath's blood was not shed in vain.
And people here are outraged at the way the pilot was killed. Jordanians are angry not only because Kasasbi was murdered, but also because they feel manipulated by ISIL. The group had demanded the release of Iraqi prisoner Sajid al-Rishawi, and Jordan was willing to negotiate an exchange deal. But ISIL demanded Rishawi's release after it had already killed Kasasbi. The government now hopes more people will support the fight against the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant.
Well, Jordan is, of course, an important American ally in the fight against ISIL. But before the pilot's death, many people were unhappy about their country's involvement. That was reflected in comments made by Kasasbi's father and other Jordanians on social media, saying things like, "This is not our war." In fact, a poll published by the University of Jordan in September shows only 62% of Jordanians consider ISIL a terrorist group. And it's estimated that between 2,000 and 2,500 Jordanians are fighting with the armed group, the third largest Arab contingent after Saudi Arabia and Tunisia. Well, let's bring our guests now. From London, we have Shiraz Maher, a senior research fellow at the International Center for Study of Radicalisation at King's College. In Dubai, on Skype, Riad Kahwaji, the founder and CEO of the Institute for Near East and Gulf Military Analysis. And joining me here in studio in Doha, Adnan Hayajneh, a political analyst and professor of political science at Qatar University. Welcome, all three of you. Adnan, let me start with you. First of all, your reaction to the decision by Jordan to carry out the execution of these two people at this time, and how do you see Jordan's role in the coalition against ISIL in the long term?
Well, thank you, Hazem. First of all, I would like to convey my condolences, I think, to the father and I think the wife and of our pilot, killed pilot, I think by a barbaric way. Regarding, I think, Jordan participation in this, there's a lot of questions about that. Jordan has been generous to all of its neighbors, and I think it's been the safe haven for more than 1.5 million refugees coming from Syria, 1 million coming from Iraq, and refugees coming from Palestine. It's been moderate states, very supportive of international law. And I think it was a tragic event. It was a black day for, I think, most of Jordanians. I think I would say all of the Jordanians, I think, were hurt by this event, by this barbaric killing by Daesh. Let's call them Daesh because Daesh, as a name in Arabic, it has a lot of bad connotations. Jordan's role is important, I think, in avoiding any action based on, I think, in the emotional mourning that we are having right now, I think, in Jordan. They should be rational of calculating, I think, their steps. I think fighting ISIS is not only done by military means, it has other means. And I think we, as an international community, failed to fight ISIS in Iraq and Syria. I think removing Assad was an important step, I think, to fighting ISIS. I think economic development, political development, I think, within the Arab world, I think opening to the Muslim moderates, I think, well, I think give way for more support, internal support to Jordan and internal support in the Arab world to fighting such a terrorist group, not an Islamic group, because it has nothing to do with Islam.
We'll talk more about some of those issues in a moment, but I just want to pick up on the point that you made a little bit earlier about not wanting this to be an emotional reaction. And the reason I asked earlier about the decision to carry out the executions of these two prisoners who were already sentenced to death, we should point out. Many human rights groups say it was just that this was a kind of knee-jerk emotional reaction within the last 24 hours that wasn't necessary. What's your view on that?
Both of them, they were convicted. I think one of them was, she was convicted of trying to carry out a bomb. I think it was exploded, I think, in Jordan in November 2005, and I think it killed more than 57 people. The other person, I think, he was convicted by a court of law in Jordan.
This was Ziad al-Karbouli.
Yes, because of killing a truck driver, a Jordanian truck driver. And I think 11 Jordanian men were executed a few weeks ago. So maybe the coincidence, I think, Jordan threatened, I think, a lot of calls from the Jordanian people to execute them if he was not released. And I think there was a lot of emotion, I think, yesterday and today by following the Jordanian media and social media. There's a lot of rage and anger directed against ISIS. And I think this is an important step, I think, for the Jordanian government to keep stability within, I think, the country and to observe any demands that ISIS would like to see in Jordan in terms of destabilizing the country and maybe having some riots against the government. The government was a little bit criticized, I think, by the people. It was not clear, and I think the father of our Jordanian pilot, I think, criticized the government for not doing enough to release him. And there was a lot of questions, but I think these days, I think we have to be rational and we have to calculate things. Jordan is not the strongest nation in the Middle East, and there are so many ills in the Middle East. Jordan cannot fight by itself.
All right, let's bring in Shiraz Maher. And Shiraz, this was a particularly horrifying murder that was carried out by ISIL, horrifying even by their standards. How do you look at this in comparison with the other groups that you've studied in this and with ISIL in the past?
Well, I think this video is clearly incredibly distressing. It's very disturbing. And when you even put it on the spectrum of all the various different jihadi videos we've seen over the last few years from Syria and more broadly over the last decade from the global jihad movement, this one is particularly unique for its sadism and for its cruelty. Now, all of that theatre that they put into making this video and into packaging it the way they did is designed to catch our attention. It's designed to ensure that we're talking about it, and it's designed to provoke a reaction. And it's achieved just that. Within an hour of the video being released, the White House was forced to respond to it. So you effectively have the most powerful man in the world, President Obama, who you are forcing to react to your video within the space of an hour. As you mentioned at the start of the program, a lot of Jordanians were questioning Jordan's role in this conflict. And just this morning, we've learned that the United Arab Emirates has pulled out of the coalition altogether because it's concerned about the safety of its pilots. So that's really striking at what the underlying objective of this video is. Every military wants to achieve a degree of superiority to develop an edge over its adversaries. Now, typically that's done by investing in better hardware, having more equipment in order to overcome and overwhelm your enemy. Now, Islamic State, of course, will never be able to develop and acquire the types of technology that will give it an advantage over either the neighboring countries or indeed over the United States. What it can do, though, is develop this asymmetry of fear. And that's precisely what they've done with this video, and it's precisely what they did with the previous videos as well.
Do you think then, Shiraz Maher, once the anger in Jordan over all of this has subsided, in the long term, they may decide to kind of step back in this coalition against ISIL? And the reason I ask that is because the UAE made that decision a couple of months back. Once this pilot had been captured, they made the decision to suspend airstrikes. Do you think something like that could happen in the case of Jordan later on?
Well, I think the Jordanian case is entirely different. The UAE has the luxury of being able to pull back. It's thousands of miles away. But Islamic State is on Jordan's doorstep. It's in neighboring Iraq. It's in neighboring Syria. It's across two of their borders. It is a real threat for Jordan. So I'm afraid if the Jordanians are saying, well, we don't understand why we're participating in this, it's not our war, well, I'm afraid it's on their doorstep, and Islamic State would love to make it Jordan's war. They would love to go into Jordan and to start trying to annex parts of territory and parts of land there as well. So for the Jordanians, and certainly for the royal family, I think they realize that this is a problem that is very real, it's on their doorstep, and it is Jordan's problem. It will have to continue confronting Islamic State.
Riad Kahwaji, what's your take on this? Do you think that this will strengthen Jordan's response to ISIL?
Yeah, I think the ISIL did a big mistake with this Hollywood-style execution of the pilot. I think this angered a lot of Jordanians, even those who had doubts about their country's involvement in this coalition now think otherwise. This is a tribal society where vengeance is part of the culture. So they all now, in general, Jordanians want to feel that they have to get even for what happened to this pilot. And I agree, Jordan, its position on the borders of both Iraq and Syria, which are both strongholds for ISIL, has no choice but to be part of this coalition and the war on terror.
Adnan, what's your response to some of what we've heard just now? And I want to ask you as well about when we talk about the fate of Kasasbi, who was a member of a large tribe in Jordan that forms the backbone of support for the monarchy in Jordan, and it was something that had gripped the country for weeks. But some Jordanians had criticized King Abdullah for embroiling them in a US-led alliance that they say would provoke a backlash like this. Is that a valid fear?
First of all, I think Pilot Qasasbeh is the son of all Jordanians, and I think all Jordanians are united against the cause, I think, of fighting terrorism and extremism and, in the Middle East. But I think the whole issue is Jordan cannot do it by itself, and I think the U.S.-led coalition against ISIL, it has to be re-evaluated, and I think a military option is not the only option. There have been a lot of airstrikes against ISIL, and it all failed. Nothing has come out of it positive of the declining power of ISIS. And I think that's why I think we have to rethink about our options as Jordanians. We have to think about our options as an international community, how to deal with it. In terms of thinking of the internal politics, I think a lot of people are not talking about this. There is a lot of solidarity in, I think, Jordan. In Jordan, there's a lot of support to the king and to the keeping the country united. And I think maybe this is not the right time for Jordanians to re-evaluate their role, I think, in fighting Daesh and ISIS in Iraq and Syria. But I think for the Jordanians, I think they need to re-evaluate their foreign policy, and they need to be more involved in the decision-making process. And I think they have to evaluate the cost and if they can bear this cost in the future.
Shiraz Maher, I know you kind of touched on a little bit of this earlier, but I want to get into this idea that what we've seen in the killing of Qasasbeh was that it kind of goes against the whole ethics of war, if I could use it that way. This is something that will surely shock and revile more people than anything else, wouldn't it?
Well, we have to bear in mind, of course, when talking about Islamic State, they don't play by the international order, they don't play by international rules. They have their own set of moral standards, their own ethical compass, their own set of norms, as it were, that they've derived from their own particularly draconian and I would say twisted version or interpretation of Islam that they've chosen to take forward. So in that context, though, we can't judge them by our standards. So let's look at what they have said in terms of why they did this and their reasoning for how they got there. So they use a principle known as qisas, which comes from Islamic law, and it's essentially the measure of equal retaliation. And as a result, what they've said is that a bomb is essentially an incendiary device, and therefore they wanted to punish this pilot, in their own words, with sort of the equal retaliation, and hence that they chose this method. Now, there has been a lot of pushback. I was looking at the internet last night and this morning, even from other, you could say, radicals who are generally opposed to the West, who are opposed to the coalition airstrikes, but who aren't necessarily fully fledged supporters of Islamic State. And even they've been quite critical about the particular method. There is a real dispute within Islam about whether anyone other than God has the right to quote-unquote punish with fire. And so in that context, again, you've seen Islamic State scramble very, very quickly in the last day in order to put out their version of justifications and their own sort of scriptural sources to try and validate and justify and explain what they've done. But what's interesting is there has been a lot of pushback, and that's forced them to come out with more justifications and more sort of legalistic interpretations to support their point of view than they've had to do in the past.
Well, let's just broaden this out a little bit now and talk about the fact that US President Barack Obama has said that some 60 nations are contributing to the coalition fighting against ISIL, but only a small number of them have been involved in airstrikes. The Arab countries in the coalition are Jordan, as well as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain and Morocco. But in December, as we said earlier, the UAE suspended its airstrikes because of fears about pilot safety, and Qatar has limited its role to air patrols rather than airstrikes. Riad Kahwaji, just putting aside just what we mentioned there about Qatar and UAE, this is the US has tried to bring together a broad coalition against ISIL. Do you think something like this might the whole brutality of this act that might galvanize other Muslims in the region against ISIL?
The lack of participation, it is not because they don't want to. It's because they don't see a U.S. strategy. They do not see eye to eye with the U.S. on the approach and the fight against ISIS. Until now, there are no firm answers as to what brought down this plane. We know it was shot down by a missile, but who fired the missile? And there are big suspicions that it was fired by the Syrian military. So there are big concerns here, and there are demands from many of the participants in the coalition that this air campaign must include and take out the Syrian army air defenses and impose a no-fly zone over all of Syria so that there is actual safety. That's why Arab and non-Arab countries are not sending airplanes. They do not agree with the U.S. strategy so far, which is to avoid involving the Syrian regime and just to focus on this and try to disassociate the fate of the Syrian regime with the war on ISIS, which is a false strategy by many analysts and observers have all said that you cannot really separate both things. So there should be a real strategy that can encourage more players to come in with more firepower to end this. This is, I think, a wake-up call, I think, for the U.S. administration and others to review their current strategy, if there is any, in dealing with ISIS.
All right, I'll put that then to Adnan Hayajneh. You see it that way, that this should be a kind of a wake-up call to the coalition, that they need to be far more coordinated, particularly in the air campaign?
I think there's a lot of wake-up calls coming to from the region to the United States, to many international partners. We have to have a grand strategy to fight extremism and terrorism, not only in Syria, but in Iraq, in the Palestinian territory, extremism done by the Israelis against the Palestinians, and all of that. It has to be done in multi-aspects, not only by military means. Military means has not been effective in I think inviting ISIS. I think we have to look at the root causes I think of having terrorism and extremism in the Middle East and in the Arab world. Jordan cannot do it by itself all the fight against ISIS. I think the United States is not serious enough, and I think some of the Arab countries are reluctant, I think, to continue on that. And I think because of the killing of our Jordanian pilot, we should not, I think, be standing alone against ISIS. It has to be an international effort, has to be an international community effort to fighting not only by military means. I just said this maybe for the third time. It has to be economic fighting, political. It has to. Most of the Arab countries are dictatorships. They are not democratic. They are not allowed for other voices. I think the coup against the Arab Spring pushed most of the Arab Muslim brotherhoods, the Muslim moderates, into the corner. They just gave the extremism. I think they're given an example. Look, the Muslims Brotherhood, the Muslim moderates cannot be in government. Only the authoritarian and the dictatorship can be. So this is kind of re-evaluating the whole grand strategy against fighting against extremism in the Middle East. Just
in a couple of minutes we have left, Shiraz Maher, how do you see all of this playing out then over the next few weeks and months?
Well, it's very difficult to know how the contours of this will settle. As you mentioned, there's been this rather quick reaction from the Jordanian authorities with the execution of the two prisoners. They promised that, of course, for some time, saying that if Muad was harmed, that these executions would take place. But I do see Jordan staying in the coalition. I do regard it as probably redoubling its efforts. Quite how those efforts are redoubled is, again, at this precise moment, hard to know. And this is coming back to the point that both of the other two contributors have made, that the coalition airstrikes really are a pretty damp squib. They are not particularly effective. They have possibly had one success, which was to prevent the Islamic State moving into Kobani, but it's not really resulted in any loss of fortunes for the Islamic State, no loss of territory. And so in that sense, you have this rather large organization still straddling the Iraqi and Syrian border right now, holding a huge amount of territory that's roughly the same size as the state of Jordan itself. And there's no clear, coherent way to uproot them at this moment in time.
And on that, we're going to have to leave it. Thank you to all three of our guests, Shiraz Maher in London, Riad Kahwaji in Dubai, and Adnan Hayajneh joining me here in the studio in Doha. And thank you for joining us on another edition of Inside Story. Remember, if you've got anything to add to today's show, just go to our program page at aljazeera.com or hop on your social platform of choice. Comments can be posted to us at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And we're also on Twitter. Just tweet us at AJ Inside Story. I'm Hazem Sika from the whole team. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.